Printing, packing, faxing. The UPS Store can do any-ing and every-ing for small business. And, of course, shipping.
Wow, that's really some ing.
The UPS Store. The UPS Store franchise locations are independently owned and operated. Services, pricing, and hours may vary. See Center for details.
This is a CBC podcast.
For the summer of 2021, we are rebooting our summer series that we call Ahead by a Century. Our guide is community historian Vanessa Childs-Rolls, who has once again pored over the pages of the Sydney Daily Post to find out what stories were making headlines 100 years ago in 1921. Today's story, a streetcar crash at a notorious intersection in Sydney and the problem with the one-man streetcar. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So we're talking about a one-man streetcar as in a streetcar that carries only one person or one manned streetcar?
So it's a one-manned streetcar, and the big problem in 1921 was there was a change to the number of people that operated the streetcar. So before this, it was a two-manned operation. So we had the driver who was responsible for getting the streetcar down the tracks and stopping it and doing all the mechanical side of things. And then there would have been a conductor whose job was to help people on and off of the streetcar and collect fees and do any of the other jobs that needed to be done.
Okay. So what happened?
So what happened that got everybody all up in arms was there was a big accident at Lower Ways Crossing, which is essentially where Victoria Road crosses the railway tracks entering into the pier. And the express train came along the tracks, and the streetcar accidentally rolled back onto the tracks, and the express train hit the streetcar and totally destroyed it, smashing it to bits. Fortunately, everyone saw this happening and was able to get out of the way, so no one was hurt, but it was a fairly serious accident.
Well, so a train hit a streetcar?
Yes, because there are the tracks there where the coal train runs now. That used to be the express train to get out to New Waterford and that area.
And why do they call it Lower Ways Corner?
Well, it was originally called Macquarie's Crossing, and then they changed it to Lower Ways Corner. I'm not really sure why, but that was a fairly significant intersection because of the train tracks that were there.
And it was a notorious one?
It was very notorious. And so because of this accident, they started to look at ways they could deal with the crossing and prevent people from getting hurt. They talked about, after the accident, putting a gate up that would prevent people from going back and forth. Right after the accident, they employed somebody whose job was to flag the cars and make them stop when a train was coming. But eventually what they decided was they were just going to totally stop the railway tracks, the streetcar tracks, from going over the railway tracks. So essentially what that meant was the streetcar would pull up to Lower Ways Crossing, everyone would get off the streetcar, walk across the tracks, and then get back on the streetcar on the other side.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that the most practical option?
Well, later they decided maybe that wasn't so practical. So they ended up building the Whitney Pier subway, which went under the railway tracks, which flooded every year and was hugely problematic. And then the final result was, of course, the overpass, which we have today.
So we had a subway going to the pier?
Yeah, it was essentially just a tunnel that they dug under the railway tracks and came up the other side. And it flooded whenever it rained. There was a lot of water underneath, and it often made it impassable, which essentially cut the pier off from the rest of town.
So how expensive was the streetcar system?
It was pretty expensive, and because it was a massive system. You could take the streetcar from Charlotte Street all the way to Sydney Mines in North Sydney, or you could go all the way to Glace Bay and Reserve. So it was a massive system.
And this was the result of employee cutbacks, was it? This particular accident in February of 1921?
Yeah. So the big objection that the alderman had at the time, who was protesting, Alderman Collins, was not that he was upset that there was a loss of jobs, but more that it wasn't safe and that the driver couldn't concentrate on what was going on the road or with the car itself because he was too busy taking fares and making change and helping the elderly on and off the streetcar.
And was he okay in this accident?
Oh, the driver was okay. He managed to get off the car in time.
And there are no passengers?
And no passengers were hurt, no.
Would have been a pretty spectacular crash to see, but luckily everybody came out of it.
Yeah, my favorite quote when they were talking about how dangerous this was the top rule of engineering is to keep your hand on the throttle and your eye on the rail.
Good advice in streetcar driving and in life. Vanessa, thanks. Till next time.
You're welcome.
That is Vanessa Childs Rolls, community historian in Sydney, and our weekly guide on Ahead by a Century, looking back to the newspaper headlines from 100 years ago in 1921. Next week, it's the confiscation of the finest wine to ever hit Cape Breton shores.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.